Welcome back to another Pokemon TCG tabletop video. In today's video, I'm back at Kanzen Games, my favorite Friday night league, and I'm going to be playing Liam Halliburton's Zoroark list from the Pittsburgh Regional Championships. Now, the new set is legal for this league night, but I didn't realize that, so my Zoroark deck doesn't actually have any new cards. You'll notice the Maractus in the deck. That should almost certainly be an Evoltal. Maybe get a Lily's Determination in there, and otherwise, I think the list is pretty good. But for those of you that don't watch my videos regularly, I have been playing a lot of Poltdusk lately, and in Pittsburgh, I got beat up on by the Jellicent Gardevoirs, so I decided I had enough losing to Gardevoir, decided to switch it up, play some Zoroark, get that Dark type weakness going, and see if I can take out some Gardevoirs today. In the first round, we run into someone with the same mindset as me. They're also playing Zoroark, and it's actually going to be quite an interesting match. We do play two of these Zoroark mirrors throughout the course of the tournament, and the more I played this matchup, the more I realized how intricate it actually is. And we'll get towards why it's so intricate towards the end of the game, where you end up in somewhat of a stalemate. It actually kind of reminds me of Charizard Pidgeot mirror, but we'll talk about that when we get there. For now, we're just seeing some pretty standard opening turns, nothing too detrimental in the prize cards. My opponent did prize his Pecharunt EX, which is a big deal, as Pecharunt EX is really your only way to potentially one-shot a Zoroark EX. But of course, in the game, I don't know that, so I am afraid of a potential Pecharunt EX attack as the game goes on. Now here, I do decide to just take the first knockout onto the Cleffa. I did kind of hesitate when I did this. When I take a knockout, I'm going to be giving my opponent access to Counter Catcher, which means something on my bench is almost certainly going down this turn, which I didn't love, but I figured I could always just pass back my next turn and the prize trade will equalize, because the biggest theme in this Zoroark match is that you don't want to be swinging into your opponent's Zoroark for 170 damage, right? Because then the Reshiram, with its powerful rage attack, will just one-shot you, and then now you're trading poorly, right? You're giving up two prizes for kind of one, right? If you're two-shotting, you're essentially taking one prize per attack, and they're one-shotting you, so you're going to fall behind pretty quickly like that. Now, I think there are some situations where it is okay to smack into your opponent's Zoroark, specifically if they don't have a lot of Zoroarks or you're ahead in the prize trade. I do think it's okay to just trade off your Zoroarks and save some resources, because what we're going to see in this game is I'm going to start aggressively playing a lot of Boss's Orders to target down these one prize Pokemon. And it gets a little awkward, right? There's only two bosses and a Pal Pad in the deck, and so I can only boss so many times, and we'll see the consequences of that as the game goes on here. Something else to note, I did decide to boss and knock out the Reshiram. In hindsight, I definitely think that you should just be KOing Zoruas. My opponent, as well as killing the Reshiram, I think both of us are just kind of on autopilot killing these Reshirams. The Reshirams are actually quite easy to replace, and so are the Zoruas, but I think you just want to prevent your opponent from setting up as many Zoroarks as possible. When you get to the end of the game, having 2, 3, potentially even 4 Zoroarks in play is a huge asset. So you definitely want to be targeting down the Zoruas to try to block your opponent from getting up to those large quantity of foxes. I don't know what a group of foxes is called. If someone knows, let me know in the comment section down below. What is a group of foxes called? We can get the gang of Zoroarks. We'll call it the gang for now. That seems appropriate. But anyways, here we're going to see some more trading of these one prize Pokemon. My opponent bossed up the Reshiram again, and now this turn I think I'll go ahead and boss up my opponent's Zorua. I think at this point I realize that I should just be KOing Zoruas. We'll see if I realize or not. Maybe I just kill this Reshiram again, but I think now I'm making the decision. And I guess now is a good time to start talking about kind of the end game dynamics of the game. As we see me Pal Pad in the double Boss's Orders, Secret Box getting that Pal Pad into my hand was super nice, allowing me to keep a constant flow of Boss's Orders going here. But as we get to the end of the game, we're eventually going to reach a situation where both of us have 2 prize cards remaining. And at that point, it gets really awkward, because let's say you take out another 1 prizer and you go down to 1 prize. Well, now Pecharunt EX is doing 300 damage, one-shotting your Zoroark, and winning your opponent the game. Alright, and we know that you already can't swing into your opponent's Zoroark EX, because then Reshiram will one-shot you. So you actually end up in somewhat of a stalemate once you're both on 2 prizes, because no one really has a good attack to make, and eventually someone's got to do something, and I think it could even come down to who has less cards in their deck, right? If you're going to deck out first, then you need to be the one attacking, right? So it's like you need to get to the end game with more cards in your deck. But then there's also some more complicated dynamics involved, because if your opponent just plays an Iono and, well, you can't Iono and Boss. If your opponent plays an Iono and then on the next turn plays Boss to take out a one prizer, you kind of need to have Pecharunt, a Dark Energy, and an E-Switch, right? And if you have too many cards in your deck, you're not going to be able to find the Pecharunt play. So it definitely does get a little interesting. I will also say I think having Munkidori on the board is quite a liability, just because it's another one prizer my opponent could kill. He could like boss my Reshiram and then my Monkey. I mean, I don't even have a Reshiram here. The Fezandipitis are also huge. Yeah, you see me Turoing that Fezandipiti off the board here and just passing, because if I have that Fezandipiti on the board when we're on two prizes, my opponent can use, and I can do it too, because my opponent has the Fezandipiti as well. You can put Binding Mochi onto the Zoroark, and then use Pecharunt to poison, and then you do 2/10. So you can take out the Fezandipiti, and that's one way to break the stalemate. So I think we'll see my opponent take his Fezandipiti off the board here shortly as well with the Turo. But those are some of the dynamics going on. Some other things I think you can do to break through this kind of endgame stalemate is potentially just poke into your opponent's Zoroark. Something like attacking with Maractus for 40 damage, right? If you attack with Maractus twice, and then there'll be 80 damage because Zoroark's weak to grass, and then after that, you can pivot into the Zoroark with the Mochi for 200 damage. And then the dynamics get even more complicated, because your opponent could have Munkidoris to heal off your Maractus's damage. So then you also need to have Munkidoris, right? So I think this endgame can get fairly complex. But as I was yapping there, we actually saw 2 whole turns go by without any attacks. Like I said, you really don't want to be swinging into these Zoroarks for 170. So just as a consequence of us using a lot of our boss's orders, we're both unable to find it for a turn. Pass, pass. Now I find the boss's orders. Notably, I do only have 1 boss's orders left in my entire deck, which should be enough to win the game, but I'm going to need to find it, which could be very difficult. So we'll see how that pans out. We're going to see the Fezandipiti needs to come off the board here with the Professor Turo scenario, or else I am threatening to use Binding Mochi and boss's orders to take it out and win the game. Again, given I am actually able to find my 1 boss's orders. No Turo for my opponent, and they're just going to have to pass off the turn. And at this point, I think I find myself in a very good position. I think I can just swing into the Zoroark here for 170. If my opponent goes for the Outrage attack, then I can just come in and attack for 170 again. Now, I do give my opponent a pretty decent play here. They could retreat the damaged Zoroark. If I attack here, that is. He could retreat the Zoroark. Play a counter catcher on my Reshiram, Iono me to 2, knock out the bench Reshiram with his full HP Zoroark, and then on the next turn, he could use a boss's orders, go back into his damaged Zoroark, and win the game, right? And so because of that, I end up just passing the turn here. I want to use trade to discard some more cards from my deck. I'm not sure if this was correct. It's possible I should have just swung into the Zoroark, because now the Fezandipiti comes off the board, which is pretty annoying here. But now, because he played Professor Turo, if he was able to Turo and countercatcher that turn, I could have run into some problems, but he wasn't. And so here, now I'm just going to go ahead, thin some more cards out of my deck, and swing into the Zoroark for 170. And if he goes retreat, countercatcher, attack with the other Zoroark, well, then I'll just need to find my boss's orders. But at this point, my deck's down to maybe 5, 6, 7 cards, so I should be almost guaranteed to find that final boss's orders to close out the game. I actually think either my opponent's second countercatcher was prized. I think it was prized at this point, actually, because he's gone through pretty much his whole deck and never saw it, unless he's only playing 1 countercatcher, but I don't think that is the case. And here, not much of anything for my opponent. Doesn't have the countercatcher, doesn't have, he does have the Iono there, but no countercatcher, and so he's just going to have to pass off the turn. Can't afford to leave the damaged Zoroark in the active. Can't afford to attack in with the other one. So he's just going to go ahead and retreat out into the Reshiram. And at this point, I have guaranteed the boss's orders. You see, I have the top few cards of my deck kind of fanned out there. I'm not sure you're actually technically allowed to do that. I don't think you're actually allowed to do that at a regional tournament, like fan out the cards like that. But I knew that the boss was in the top 6 or so cards of my deck. And so then I just go ahead and use the boss's orders onto the damaged Zoroark and close out that kind of awkward stalemate endgame where I ended up having just enough boss's orders, but I definitely cut it close and wished I had 2 boss's orders in my deck at the end of the game. I think potentially, I'm not sure exactly how I should have played that differently. I think there were some opportunities for me to just smack in to a Zoroark in the early game, save my boss's orders, potentially don't discard my counter catchers so that I can use those as I kind of give up some prizes to the Reshiram. I'm not entirely sure, but I definitely, after that game, felt like I had a much more solid understanding of the Zoroark mirror and the endgame dynamics that are at play. Now here in the next round, we run into a Gholdengo. However, it's a really cool Gholdengo build with Ceruledge and Pidgeot and Dusknoir and Briar. So a little bit of like a combo style Gholdengo deck. And I did prize my Toedscruel. You'll notice no Toedschools on the board right now. I think even if my Toedscruel was in the deck, I wouldn't put down any Toedschools because you don't necessarily need the Toedschools right away. You just need to have a Toedscool on your board when you attack with the Zoroark so that if your opponent launches 6 energies into the Zoroark, then you put down the Toedscruel and they're forced to deal with that. No sense evolving it into the Toedscruel before all your opponent's energies are actually in the discard pile. You're just risking your opponent playing a boss's orders onto it, knocking it out, and then you have to recover 2 Pokemon instead of just the basic Toedscool. Now my opponent's having a little bit of a rough time here. No Dangos for him off of the Iono, just a Cypher Maniac, presumably stacking a Genesect or a Gholdengo onto the top of his deck, maybe a Rare Candy Pidgeot play as well. But I'm just going to go ahead, take this turn to set up a little more, get an energy down, draw some cards, and going to Cleffa again for, I think, 1 card, maybe 2 cards. Another thing here that is actually annoying is my bench management is kind of awful. Given that my Toedscruel is prized, the bench management is completely fine. But as you can see, there's no space for Toedscruel on this board. I think ideally this would be my board, and then instead of Pecharunt, I would want 1 Toedscool, or maybe for now just an open bench spot, and then I can eventually get down 2 Toedschools, 3 Zoroarks, and the Reshiram, and that would be the board after Cleffa hopefully gets just KO'd or Turo'd at some point if my opponent really refuses to kill it. Here we do see the Genesect, like I mentioned, get the Gholdengos, and we're going to see the E-Search Pro to get all the energies out of the deck. I think this might be a bit of an overcommitment for my opponent. I think maybe just an Earthen Vessel would have been a little bit better. Keep the E-Search Pro in the deck here, because now when my opponent KOs the Cleffa, he's got all the energies in his hand, and I'm going to hit him with quite a lethal Iono here, right? We're going to see all those energies go to the bottom of the deck, and now there's no E-Search Pro to search them out, so it's going to be very difficult for my opponent to knock out Zoroark EX in 1 hit, and that's going to be what I'm relying on as my Toedscruel is prized, which should mean I'm in for a rough time here. Now, I do need to find a Dark Energy this turn. I could also potentially find Energy Switch to move the energy off the Pech onto the Zoroark, but I'd really rather not have to do that. I'd rather keep that energy in play on the Pecharunt, so I do get down the Fezandipiti. We're going to go ahead and trade 3 times, and we are actually going to whiff the Dark Energy here. Pretty annoying because Iono plus 6 from Zoroark plus 3 from Fez. I just drew 15 cards and did not see a Dark Energy. So we're just going to have to retreat out into the Zoroark and pass off the turn. Hope our opponent can't get the KO, but now he gets extra time, right? He doesn't even have to one-shot me here. He could just, for example, launch 2 energies into me for 100 this turn, and then next turn launch 200 into me for a KO. And I wouldn't really be able to capitalize as I missed the attack here, so I'm a little annoyed. And then I'm even more frustrated when I see my opponent put a Pidgeot into play immediately. Going to be in a bit of a rough spot. At least the E-Search Pro is down, so my Zoroark isn't going to be guaranteed knocked out. We see Pidgeot get the Cypher Maniac. This is going to get a bunch of energies, and we'll have to see if my opponent is able to put together the 1-hit knockout onto the Zoroark EX. If he is, I think I'm pretty much just going to have to concede the game. I don't really see how I could win after that. Down 3 prizes with no Toedscruel. But he is actually short in energy and just decides to launch the energies into the Zoroark for 250. Now this gives me an opportunity to one-shot my opponent's Pidgeot, which is very nice. And then hopefully he won't be able to draw everything he needs to win the game. I will say I am still technically losing the prize trade, I think, because I can't really take any more one-shot knockouts. I can take out a Gholdengo at the end of the game with Pecharunt EX. But so here, like, let's kind of talk it out. I use a Zoroark, I kill the Pidgeot, I go down to 4 prizes. My opponent's just going to knock out my active Zoroark. He's going to go down to 3. Assuming he evolves his Gimmighoul on the bench into Gholdengo, what knockout can I really get? None, right? We do see the Dunsparce come onto the board, so that's something I could knock out, but like even that's not really helping me. I need to be taking 2 prize knockouts, as on my opponent's next turn, he's going to take another 2 prize knockout, and he's going to be ahead on pace. So I'm going to need him to miss one more time. I'm going to need a clutch Iono here, and hopefully my Zoroark EX does not get knocked out. Hopefully I can also trap something in the active this turn, maybe bring up the Ceruledge or the Dango without any energies. I do have access to the counter catcher. Additionally, I didn't mention it, but on my last turn, I did Turo up my Fez in order to fit a Toedscool onto the board, as I was drawing 2 prize cards, so I thought if I was able to draw the Toedscruel off the prizes, I wouldn't want to waste any time getting it into play immediately. I thought that was one of my best ways back into this game, so I decided to get that Toedscool down. Didn't end up working out. I didn't draw the Toedscruel off the prizes, but I think I stand by that decision, as it would have been quite a swing in the game. If I was able to establish a Toedscruel here, I would feel very confident that my Zoroark would not be being knocked out, and in that case, I would be winning the prize trade. But here, you're just going to see me sequence out the Iono play. We got the PP up onto the Zoroark and the second energy attachment. Just going to be swinging in for 170 here, and then if my opponent is unable to find the knockout, next turn, I can take the knockout, and then I can win the game on the last turn by using Pecharunt to kill Genesect or Ceruledge or Gholdengo. If my opponent KOs the Pecharunt, I'll need to find a Super Rod and, well, I'll need to find some combination of a way to recover the Pecharunt, a way to attach a Dark Energy, and an Energy Switch in order to get the 2 energies back onto it. So hopefully our Pecharunt doesn't go down. That would be really annoying, either this turn or next. Now we see my opponent draw into a decent amount of energies here. I'm not sure exactly what he needs to get the KO here. It looks like there's, I don't know how many energies were in his discard pile there, but he needed to get up to 6 energies somehow, and it looks like he's a little short by the amount of time he's taking. Just going to go ahead and swing in for 200. I'm not sure if this was the correct move. It might have been, because if he doesn't swing in, then I can just play Iono, and then all of his energies go to the bottom of the deck again. So I definitely understand wanting to do some damage, but what this is going to let me do is play around Briar, right? I mentioned Briar at the start. With the Ceruledge, next turn, he could potentially have Briared me and then taken 3 prizes on my Zoroark EX and won the game. So I do go ahead and just counter catcher up that Ceruledge, take the knockout with the Reshiram. I get the Fezandipiti onto the board. At this point, I don't need the Toedscruel to win the game anymore. All I need to do is find Pecharunt, E-Switch, and a recovery card on my last turn of the game in order to knock something out. So I get the Fezandipiti onto the board, guaranteeing myself a lot of draw power on the last turn, right? If my opponent kills the Pecharunt, I'll draw 9 cards between Fez and 3 Zoroarks. Looks like I have less than 9 cards in my deck, so I should be guaranteed to find what I need, barring some strange circumstance. And if my opponent doesn't kill the Pecharunt, well, then the Pecharunt is just going to come in and win the game. So once you kind of take over in the prize trade, I would say, that turn I just went from, in theory, losing the prize trade if my opponent found the knockouts he needed. Now I'm winning the prize trade, so I just flood my board with draw power. Don't worry about what my opponent is doing, and make sure that I'm able to get that Pecharunt up on the last turn. So a little bit of an interesting game there with the Toedscruel prized, but I think my opponent just unable to put together those good one-shot KOs with the Gholdengo, and we're able to win that one. As we get into round 3 here, we're going to run into another Zoroark mirror, and this time my opponent is playing Hero's Cape, which is definitely interesting and something I considered in this Zoroark deck, but I think, especially after playing this league, I felt like Secret Box was just way too good. It gets you everything you need. Stadium, supporter. It usually gets like counter catcher. You get Artazon for Reshiram. You get Iono. And then you get a tool. I don't know. Usually the tool doesn't matter too much, but it can help you find the Mochi, which can be very relevant. Now, my opponent here does have 2 Toadschools in play. I don't think this is an optimal strategy. I don't think the Toadschools do a whole lot in the mirror. And like I said, it's important to have multiple Zoroarks in play, so I think just having extra Zoruas on the board would be a little bit more impactful, but it's definitely going to be annoying as he's also able to take out one of my Zoruas. That's going to limit my draw power here, and I don't have a particularly strong start going on here. Just going to be getting down some basics, getting out the Fezandipiti, which, I mean, I feel like realistically the Fezandipiti always has to come onto the board for you to get through your deck, and then at some point it needs to get back off the board, right? Like you can't have the Fezandipiti on the board at the end of the game when you're in that 2-2 prize stalemate. So I think it's realistic to put it down and then expect it to come off the board later. Now here you will notice I had the Secret Box in my hand, but I didn't really know what I was really Secret Boxing for. Like, what does Secret Box actually do for me here? Not a whole lot. It's not really realistic for me to be able to attack this turn. I would have to discard a Dark Energy and then get my Zoroark to the bench and then get my Zoroark back into the active and then also have Ends PP up and also a Gusting effect because I don't want to just attack into the Zoroark, right? And so I decided to just attach and pass, keep the Secret Box. Next turn, the Secret Box can get Hilda, which can get me the second Dark, which can get me an attack. Also the second Zoroark, right? So here we'll just see me fire off that Secret Box. Night Stretcher hitting the bin as the Toedscruel is blocking it, and I'm not going to be killing that Toedscruel anytime soon. Just going to let it chill there and hopefully make do with the Pokemon that I have in play. Now my opponent did opt to just swing into my Zoroark. I think this actually makes a lot of sense. He's ahead in the prize trade. It's my only Zoroark with my only energy, and so he applies a lot of pressure by doing this. Right, this turn, yes, I attach, I attack, but then he knocks me out, and it could be awkward for me to chain together additional Zoroarks. I also think he doesn't want to have an aggressive start and then just start passing off to me when I have Counter Catcher active, right? Then I'm just going to start Counter Catchering Pokemon on the bench. So I think I like his decision here to just apply pressure, but it is going to equalize this game fairly quickly as now I get an attack that's worth 2 prizes as my opponent is attacking for essentially 1 prize of value each time, right? Just 2-shotting my EX Pokemon, going to be about worth 1 prize a turn. Now we see additional Zorua come onto the board. I think my plan for the rest of the game here is just going to be to target down those Zoruas as much as possible. Whenever my Zoroark is damaged, of course, I'm going to be taking those one-shot KOs. My opponent does also have the Pecharunt EX on their board, so there's some pressure for them to find Professor Turo at some point before we get to that 2 prizes each endgame. And so that's good for me, especially with their limited draw power. Finding Turo could be kind of a pain for them. So we'll see how that develops as the Zoroark comes back up into the active and is just going to go ahead and take out my Zoroark with that Virtuous Flame, I want to say. But yeah, anyways, my board here, I think this is a pretty optimal board. Of course, the more Zoroarks, the merrier. I think I will try to establish another Zorua here if I can. It's going to require my Super Rod, which I do have there. Very nice. I do actually make a mistake here. I have right now 2 Ends PP up in my hand and 2 Dark Energies in my discard. And so I wanted to Super Rod back the energy to draw into it, but I actually have the attack guaranteed by keeping those energies in the discard pile. And so I shouldn't have used the Super Rod. I should have just waited, seen what I drew. If I draw into a Dark Energy, then I can Super Rod back an additional one. And if I don't, I could just use the 2 PP ups. But it ends up all working out for me. I get the 2 energies onto the Zoroark. I imagine I have some kind of Boss's Orders or Counter Catcher in my hand. And I'm just going to be going ahead and taking out the Zorua. We see Counter Catcher. Very nice for me. It's going to allow me to conserve my Boss's Orders. And at this point, I still have both Boss's Orders and my Pal Pad. Lots of resources for me going into this endgame, which we're getting rather close to as we are both on 3 prizes. Now here, I'm thinking about Turoing up my Fezandipiti. I do think it's pretty unrealistic for my opponent to find Binding Mochi here, right? He's not playing Secret Box, so his only out would be to just draw into the Mochi and a Boss's Orders, which seems unlikely, but I figure why risk it? I have a pretty stable board. I have 2 Zoroarks. I don't need the Fezandipiti to stay in play anymore, so I do decide to just Turo it now while I can. Additionally, my opponent could just play a random Iono, and then I could never find Turo again. And I think, did I just see the Mochi at the top of his hand? Maybe I am a genius, because my Fezandipiti could have been going down, and that would have been very, very bad for me. But here, now we're just going to see the Zoroark come back into the active. I'm interested to see if my opponent will go for the attack here, and he ends up deciding to pass, which I think is correct, because if he attacks, then I would just one-shot him, and that would put him in a rough spot. He does take this turn to Turo up the Pecharunt, which is definitely necessary going into these endgame 2-prize situations. You'll notice here I was able to get to a triple Zoroark board, so I think I do have the advantage in this endgame situation. I just have more draw power, which is going to mean I'm more likely to be able to find like Pecharunt Energy E-Switch, for example, or some other kind of combo in order to get through this endgame. Now here, the Zoroark comes back up into the active, and my opponent is still on 3 prizes. So if he wants to properly play this 2-prize stalemate, he needs to draw a prize this turn. If he doesn't draw a prize, I can just swing into his Zoroark, he can one-shot me, and then on the next turn, I can just knock him out and win the game. Now here we're just talking about the damage, because there is 20 on it from Pecharunt, and then I bossed, and I think the damage was correct. That is a 2 on there. I'm not entirely sure, but it did end up being inconsequential to the end of the game, so not anything to worry about there. And my opponent here, I think, maybe misses the counter catcher if I remember correctly. We'll have to see what he does. Yeah, it looks like he doesn't have the counter catcher here, so he's just gonna have to pass. And now at this point, I can just swing into this Zoroark. There is like a little bit of concern here, like the last game where I swing in, and then the Zoroark goes to the bench, and then eventually my opponent knocks out my Reshiram with a full HP attacker, and then uses the damaged Zoroark to one-shot another Zoroark and win the game. But because he doesn't have a backup Zorua, I felt pretty comfortable here to just swing in for 170. I think technically it's possible for him to go like Pecharunt, Double Dark, counter catcher the Reshiram, kill the Reshiram with Pecharunt, and then on the next turn, he can do what I was saying and win the game. But it just seemed really unlikely. He's only got 1 Zoroark, and so I just decided to play an Iono. Gonna draw some cards, keep trading, filter through my deck. You'll see it's down to about 10-15 cards. That is something I do love about this deck, just like Dragapult. The draw power really does feel incredible, especially when you're not playing against a deck like Raging Bolt or Gholdengo. You're playing against a slower matchup, something like the Zoroark Mirror, Dragapult, Gardevoir. You have so much time to filter through your deck. And yeah, let me just see the smack in. And I think if there was a counter catcher here, we could see kind of what I was talking about. The Yveltal could trap the Reshiram in the active for a few turns, then potentially knock it out, right? The Yveltal second attack does do 110, so he could like corner me for a few turns, then kill the Reshiram, and then have the Zoroark on the bench for the follow-up. But without enough draw power, he's not able to put it together, and I am able to close out the game. I think that one I played a little bit better than the first Zoroark Mirror, but I think there is definitely still something to be learned here. This matchup feels fairly complicated. I got to think about all the different ways to break out of that proper stalemate. We didn't quite get to the stalemate here, but if we did, I wonder if going like Maractus for 40, and then eventually you can soften it up enough to knock out the Zoroark without giving it enough damage to one-shot you with the outrage attack. So definitely some interesting dynamics there. As we get into the 4th round here, I am currently undefeated with this Zoroark deck, which I am pretty happy about, and we run into a Gardevoir player, which should be a fairly good matchup for me, but I do have a fairly underwhelming turn 1 here. Oh, looks like I'm actually going second, and as we do our prize checks, I will mention, I haven't mentioned yet this video, at League, we do quite often just look at our prizes. Saves us some time instead of spending, I don't know, a minute and a half each figuring out what's in our prize cards. Let's just look at them, save ourselves some time, have some more fun. It's a Friday night league. We're not too worried about the competitive integrity of prize checking. But here is that mediocre turn 1 I was talking about. I do just get Cleffa up into the active. Only 1 Zorua hits the board, which is really bad as I know my opponent is playing the Jellicent build, which can definitely give me some issues here. If I'm not able to set up enough Zoroarks, we could see like my 1 Zorua get taken out or my 1 Zoroark get taken out before I'm able to set up a wide board, and then I could just lose the game. Now, one saving grace for me here is that my opponent does put down the Artazon. I'm not sure if he could have got away without the Artazon or if he needed the Artazon. I think he needed the Artazon to get the Frillish, but potentially finding a way to not put that Artazon into play could have been very good for him, as it's going to help me set up my Zoruas, which otherwise I'm very hard pressed to find without any item cards or any search for them at all. I'm really going to be relying on this Artazon to get my Zoroarks into play. Now, additionally, the other thing that this Frillish lock is doing is blocking me from playing Night Stretcher or Super Rod or Ends PP up, right? So I'm limited to 1 Dark Energy attachment a turn, and I only have 5 Dark Energies in my deck, And some additional context for this game is that I actually prized 2 more Dark Energy. So there's a total of 3 Dark Energy in my entire deck. It's going to be very difficult for me to get those attachments and get attacking with Zoroark EX. As we see the Frillish take out the Cleffa here, I think I am going to get the second Zoroark online this turn, potentially with a Hilda. That's also going to find me a Dark Energy. Great card for me to find here, as it's just really the perfect development piece. Now, I am holding off on the Artazon here. I am pretty content to draw into a Zorua here. Then I could Artazon for a Munkidori or another Zorua. So no need to thin that Zorua out of my deck. Just going to wait on that Artazon. Get the Zorua down afterwards. We're not using Recon Directive, so there's no worries when it comes to shuffling the deck. And there I just do my prize check there. And there are 2 Dark Energies in there, which is, I would say, moderately concerning. Now, at this point, I am down a prize, and so I didn't want to leave my Reshiram in the active. My opponent could potentially just evolve into Jellicent and then kill my Reshiram with Jellicent, which seems really annoying to be item locked, Reshiram and discard, and then potentially maybe I Artazon for Reshiram, and then it also dies to Jellicent. I wasn't exactly sure. Also, being down 2 prizes didn't feel good. I thought there might have been potential for my opponent to just straight up prize race me from there. So I went into the Zoroark, but I think this was actually bad because now the Zoroark is kind of awkwardly stranded in the active. I think if anything, I should have gone into the one with the Dark Energy so that this turn I could attack and just take out the Frillish and just stop giving my opponent so much time to set up. And now I'm also faced with an awkward decision because I only have 3 Dark Energies in my whole deck right now. And so if I attach to the active, now I need to find my only Dark Energy if I want to attack, which means I can't get Dark Energy onto Munkidori. Now, my Dark Energy is in my hand, so I do decide to just attach to the active and hope I don't get Iono'd. An Iono here would be devastating. I could use a Hilda to find this Dark Energy again, but otherwise, I've just got no way to find it. And now here we see the Jellicent come online, and we're going to see the Power Press for 160. Some Munkidori damage going to be spread around as well. I think my opponent probably angling for some kind of Devo play. You see the Devo in his hand there. I'm not entirely sure if I like this Jellicent coming into play here. I guess, so the problem is he could just sit here and continue to use Frillish, but the problem with that is that it just doesn't really apply any pressure. Eventually, I'll find a Dark Energy, I'll find a boss, and I'll take out his Gardevoir. So I definitely understand evolving into the Jellicent here, put on some pressure, force me to do something this turn. If I don't have Dark Energy, he's going to have a really good time, but I do have the energy, and I get to take out the Jellicent. I think something interesting to look for as a Gardevoir player here, if he didn't have a Fezandipiti on the board, he could have put down 2 Frillishes and then just started retreating between the Frillish, generate free damage for the Munkidori, push it onto my board, and just keep me item locked, keep a 1 prizer in the active, and then eventually go for some kind of sick Devo play. But the Fezandipiti is on the board, so he can't get the double Frillish, and so he goes Jelly, and then I just get to knock it out, which is quite good for me. Now here my opponent's going to go for the Clefairy. This is moderately annoying as it is weak to metal. For those of you that don't know, it's not weak to dark. And so I don't really have the damage required to knock out a Clefairy. I would have to use Munkidori, Binding Mochi, Pecharunt, and then I could get there. But I think what I'm going to do instead is just ignore this Clefairy. I did get access to Counter Catcher with that knockout. Now, one thing that is really scary in this position is the idea of TM Devo. And so something I realize I can do here to kind of try and play around the Devo, get the Pecharunt down, hopefully get some energies onto it. I can attach to it for turn. If I find another Ends PP up and an E-Switch, I could even get 2 energies onto it, which would be really good. I think I also want to get Fezandipiti onto my board here. I mentioned this earlier, but at this point, I do feel like I'm just winning the prize trade, right? I have 4 prizes. My opponent has 3. If I can just take a 2 prize knockout back to back on these next 2 turns, I'm going to win the game. And so that's kind of what I'm optimizing for here. I get the Fez down, I play Iono, and the main reason I'm actually Ionoing here is so that my opponent doesn't find an Iono, just trying to limit his cards. Also trying to get through my deck a bit, try to find the cards I need to close out the game on the final turn, right? I need a Boss's Orders, I need a Dark Energy, and I do actually find the second Ends PP up and the E-Switch, which is going to allow me to prep that Pecharunt EX on the bench, and then Fezandipiti going to be going down here. No reason for me to be killing Gardevoir EX. There is 2 of them on the board. That would actually just help my opponent, give him an extra bench space. Just going to go ahead, take out the draw power, hope that he's unable to find an Iono. And if he is, I'll certainly be able to win the game as I've got I don't know, maybe about 10 cards there. I think I also still have my Secret Box in my deck, so I have a decent amount of outs here. 2 Boss's Orders to close out the game, assuming my opponent goes for that TM Devo play, which I imagine he will. Additionally, if he TM Devos and knocks out both Zoroark, I do get Counter Catcher as an out, right? So that just gives me another way to kill the bench. That being said, I think it is still worth it for him to Devo both. Well, yeah, I think it's still worth to Devo both. If you had like Iono plus Devo with the monkey, and then I miss boss, and then he would win the game. But here, we don't see an Iono. We saw an Arven. Just going to see a Counter Catcher on the Munkidori, and we're going to see that Devo taking out both the Zoroarks after some Munkidori damage is moved around. And I do have the boss orders to close it out. But this match was a little bit closer than I wish it was. That Frillish at the start of the game really put in a lot of work, as I was unable to get a lot of Zoroarks, and I was down a couple of Dark Energies and unable to get my own Munkidori set up because of the Frillish. And then I definitely felt the pressure of the TM Devo there. Potentially got a little bit lucky in order to get the double PP up and the E switch onto the board there. But we're going to wrap up a win there. We're going to be 4-0 going to this last round, where we do run into a Raging Bolt. Now, there are the Team Rocket's Watchtowers in the list to block Noctowl. However, I still think this matchup is really bad. It's just way too easy for a Raging Bolt to knock out a Zoroark EX. Additionally, Zoroark doesn't have the same level of tricks as something like Dragapult or Gardevoir. You just have to take knockouts, so you're going to be frequently giving your opponent access to Fezandipiti. Mew's going to be drawing plenty of cards, and also Teal Mask Ogerpon can take out the Zoroark, so I think it's just way too easy for my opponent to string together these KOs. Now, something interesting I do here, I have one Nest Ball in my opening hand, and I decided to get Fezandipiti instead of Zorua. And I think this was actually a really good decision. Let me know in the comment section down below if you would have got a Zorua there, but I think it's just way too easy for my opponent to have like a random Crispin or a random like Sada's off the top or something, and then my Zorua gets sniped, and then I just lose the game immediately. Whereas when I get the Fezandipiti, even if my opponent has that Sada or the Crispin, I'm able to play the game with the Fezandipiti. However, I could see the counter argument that I should just get the Zorua, pray that my Zorua doesn't die, and then if it doesn't, I'm in a better position. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comment section down below. Turn 1, your hand is completely dead. You're using Cleffa to draw 4 or 5 cards in that spot, and you get the Zorua. Do you get the Fezandipiti? I guess the question is, how risk averse of a player are you? As a Dragapult player, I've learned to be very risk adverse. I'm comfortable going down lots of prizes and winning the game, so I ended up going for the Fez. That's something I've done with Dragapult as well, but I could also see an argument to just get the Zorua and pray it doesn't die. But anyways, we see my opponent with the Raging Baby Bolt attack for a turn there. Then he finds the energy and takes out a Zorua. I believe he took out a Zorua. Yeah, he took out a Zorua. And now we're going to get my board developed, get some energies into play, some cards coming down just so I can Cleffa for additional cards. And my opponent, quick turn, just going to attack with the Baby Bolt. I don't know how it's possible that my opponent's hand is so bad here, but I am definitely thankful, as I'm just going to go ahead and get into the Zoroark, take the knockout here. I am trying to set up the Toedscruel in this matchup. I think it's worth doing if you can do it relatively easily. Blocking Night Stretcher is good, especially if you take out a really important Pokemon like Fezandipiti. Then you can block it from coming back with the Toedscruel, and then hopefully limit your opponent more with a crucial Iono. Something else to note here is that Team Rocket's Watchtower is in play, so Noctowl not going to be active here, as my opponent just goes into the Bolt EX and hits the Burst Roar. Now, at this point, my opponent's on 4 prizes, I'm on 5, so I theoretically could just win the prize trade from here. It would require a lot of gusting effects, so this turn, I could knock out the Latias or the Hoot Hoot. The turn after, I knock out whichever one I didn't already, so let's say this turn, I kill the Latias, next turn, I kill the Hoot Hoot. Then on the final turn of the game, I can close it out with, I'm actually losing this prize trade here. I need my opponent to whiff for a turn, because if he takes back-to-back 2 prize knockouts, then I'm losing the game. So I actually still need him to whiff here. So I go ahead, I take out the Ogerpon. I need him to miss 1 attack, and then I can take back-to-back knockouts and close out the game here. So we're really hoping to dodge a Professor Sada. We don't like to see Nest Ball for Fezandipiti, but it looks like the Fezandipiti is prized. I don't see it in the deck there. Oh no, there's the Fezandipiti. Uh-oh, we're gonna see 3 cards for my opponent. Please no Sadas. There is a Watchtower in play. There's no Teal Mask Ogerpon on his board, so it's a little bit unlikely for him to find. Well, I wouldn't say it's unlikely. I would say it's possible for him to miss, but you'll see he does have that Professor Sadas at the top of his hand there, and my Zoroark will likely be going down here. I will say I don't see a Teal Mask Ogerpon in his hand, and he is going to need a Teal Mask in order to get enough energies into play to get the knockout. We see the Ultra Ball there, but there's no Grass Energies in his hand. Yeah, no Grass Energies in his hand, so he's going to be unable to get that Teal Mask up unless there's a Grass Energy in his discard pile. Oh wait, no, the Toedscruel's blocking the Night Stretcher. He can't Night Stretcher back the Grass Energy in his discard pile, and so he's going to be unable to get this knockout here. He only does 210 damage, and I was just talking about how important that is, as it's going to mean now I'm winning the prize trade. He's missed one time, and now we've hit the point where all I care about is taking back-to-back knockouts. I think he gets a little bit flustered by the Toedscruel here, and he just leaves the Latias in the active, which is nice for me. Now I don't have to use a boss's orders. I'm just going to go ahead, take out this Latias. Now I've got 2 attackers in play. I've got the Zoroark in the active, the Pecharunt on the bench. They're both threatening to take my last knockout. Additionally, I keep my Zoroark poisoned, so it goes up to 30 damage. And now I could use Munkidori to move 30 onto Raging Bolt, and then I can poison my Zoroark again with Pecharunt and hit for 210, and that's 240. So that's another way for me to win on the final turn without a boss's orders. All I need is a Night Stretcher for that Pecharunt or a boss's orders to kill the Hoot Hoot. A lot of outs for me to close it out here, even if there were to have been an Iono or a Judge. And now here, I'm just going to go ahead, draw for turn, Secret Box the boss, and close out the game. So definitely got super lucky against this Raging Bolt player. He pretty much just bricked, which I think is what needs to happen for you to win this matchup. And that's going to wrap up today's video, guys. We do go 5-0 with Zoroark at Kanzen. Definitely interested in playing this deck moving forwards, especially as more and more people are playing Gardevoir. I think this could be a good choice for the Milwaukee Regionals. Let me know if you guys enjoyed the video in the comment section down below. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Helps me continue to make these videos. And I'll see you guys in the next one.